everyone, this has been done, your AP Sensei, giving you some thoughts for today. Um, the thing is that I, want to try to do these more often, but gosh darn it, there's so much little time that I have that it's kind of difficult to do to maintain on a regular basis. But I'm going to try anyway. There've been long stretches where I haven't done a lot of YouTubing, as the parlance says, but I'm going to try a little harder to see if I can't do more to help spread some of my experience over the decades that we've been around. Anarchic Press is the company that I founded back in 1985, celebrating its 40th anniversary, which is kind of an anomaly in this business of comic books, so to speak. It's I'll let you know a little secret that has been instrumental in our longevity is that I knew very early that I was a lousy businessman. Yeah, I fully admit it. I'm not a good business. I'm not good with money. I would like to think that I am, and everyone likes to think that they are, but in reality, it takes a special kind of talent to, and discipline to handle money, especially in this business of comic books. Now, especially comic book publishing. The thing is that sometimes when we as creators achieve early success, we think that it's going to last forever, that it's going to be a life changer, and in some cases it may very well be. But, early in the days of Anarchic Press, I realized I sucked at handling money. Oh, yeah, I can create comic books. I'm pretty good at that, if I do say so myself. And I'm good at getting them out. The problem is I don't know how to manage money. And that's the problem that I think plagues a lot of comic book creators and a lot of comic book publishers. So I was very fortunate that I have a brother, his name is Joe, and he handles the day-to-day operations of the company. And unlike me, he's not an artist, but he's an artist of a different kind. He's an artist that he has the ability to handle money. He knows what bills need to be paid, what costs what, how to pay the taxes, how to pay the creators, and how to juggle the books so that we're not constantly, on the verge of bankruptcy. Over the years, over the decades, we've had successes and we had failures. That's typical of any company. You have your highs and your lows. The main thing is how to manage the highs and how to manage the lows. When you have a success in something, you shouldn't just rest on just that one success. It needs to be translated over a long period of time. It needs to be sustained. There's a reason why Marvel and DC have lasted so long. It's about cash flow. They put out a monthly book because they know they have to maintain cash flow. In order for a publisher to survive, he's got to put out product. And when a publisher doesn't meet the expectations of sales, or putting out products, then eventually it's going to go belly up. This is why I have this opinion that Comicsgate is not a serious publisher, because it's not a publishing company. It's a movement. It's a brand. It's a brand that anybody, if they really wanted to, can take. Tomorrow, if I wanted to do a Comicsgate comic, there's nothing really anybody can do about it to stop me. I will grant you that over the years, the branding of Comicsgate has, taken a hit. Maybe, I don't know if it's as lucrative a brand as it used to be. Through no fault of its own, but through the actions of the people involved. It's become a rather toxic environment, in my opinion. It's full of drama. It's full of personalities that seem to somehow want to dictate how and what direction the brand of Comicsgate is, when they really have no power to dictate that, if you really want the truth. You know, anybody, I almost say anybody who wants to use a Comicsgate brand can do so. I mean, you could try to trademark it, yes. You could try, but until you actually make it into a viable company or corporation, you have to challenge every single person who decides to use that Comicsgate brand if they wanted to, and who's willing to take up that fight. It's a loose coalition of many creators. So if someone were to say, I'm going to brand my Comicsgate, what can they really do about it? Yeah, they can try to sue you, but is it worth the effort? Is it worth the money? Is it worth the expense? And even if it were to go to court, how many years would that take? And in the meantime, the person who's going to use the Comicsgate, he's going to use it. There's really nothing you can do to stop it. Anybody can really use Comicsgate. But the thing is, the difference is that in Eric July's case with Rippaverse, he's trademarked, his logo. Yes, I realized there was a lawsuit for the Isom character, but that was settled through the company. It was and it was settled. And I don't know the details, but it obviously was settled because Eric July is continuing putting out his Isom comic, and he runs the Rippaverse as his company. Like I said, he knows what direction he wants to take, and he knows what he wants to do. And in the end, he controls every aspect of the Rippaverse. Not so with Comicsgate. Comicsgate is, like I say, a loose confederation of creators. And they drop in and out, or they disagree and they decide to leave. And what kind of brand is it anyway? I don't know what is it trying to do? What's it trying to say? What's it trying to achieve? What's it trying to accomplish? What is its mission statement? I hear all sorts of things about it. I don't know what it is exactly they do. Yes, they put out comics. Various creators put out comics, but it's a mixed bag of whatever they're doing. There's no singular vision for that, other than what started off as a consumer movement has now devolved into a brand that people can use to promote their next creation, whether it's successful or not. And which leads me to the other point, is that one of the things that AP tries to avoid, is direct confrontation, either with a competitor or with a creator, because there's no need for it. If there's a problem with a competitor or creator or things like that, we try to keep it, as close to the vest as possible. If the whole Richard C. Meyer Jawbreaker situation probably would have been handled privately had it not blown up on the internet. We probably could have worked something out with the people who disagreed with our decision to want to publish the comic. But it went out of our control, and we had no choice really but to acquiesce to the mob and the involved environment. Yes, I totally admit it was probably bending the knee, and we probably, in my opinion, I wanted to do it. I wanted to say, hey, screw them. Why should we listen to a bunch of people who, or who disagree with our decision to do Jawbreakers? And but the vitriol was so intense, that it was, the decision was made to not publish it But in the end, it actually worked out for Richard C. Meyer and for Comicsgate, truth be told, because he went on to crowdfund it on Indiegogo, and it became, at the time, one of the biggest crowdfunding independent comic books at that time. So much so, that it catapulted Richard C. Meyer into the stratosphere, and he created a movement, that his detractors label Comicsgate. At least I think that's how it went down. And then because of that, it was, co-opted by the current, creators who now are Comicsgate is now putting out product based on that. Because had it not been our decision not to do Jawbreakers, there would be no Comicsgate, truth be told. Maybe it might, but certainly wouldn't have gotten the attention it has back then. The thing is that when you're running a comic book company, creators are wanting to create. Their main goal is to put out a comic book for people to enjoy and to read and to make a mark, in the greater public, pop culture. I will grant you, very few, creators are talented enough to run a legitimate business to keep them going. That's why a lot of comic book publishers will end up on the trash heap of history. Someday Antarctic Press isn't going to be around. I fully admit everything comes to an end. But 40, 45 years, maybe even 50 years, as long as I'm still around, Antarctic Press will still be around. Maybe things will change by then. Who knows? I can't predict the future. We can only prepare for it. See, and that's the thing. If you're a creator, this is my advice to you, especially if you're starting off. Learn how to keep books. Know how to manage money. One of the first things you probably need to do is to either get a proprietorship or a limited liability corporation. This way, if things go south, you won't be liable for it. And your company can just walk away. I mean, you can just walk away, if things don't pan out. Also, if you are very successful, my advice is to manage your money in such a way that you're prepared for the lean years. Yes, you may have an initial hit. The problem is sustaining that. Marvel and DC have been around this long because every month they're putting out product. Every month. No exceptions. Because they know how important constant cash flow is in order to maintain a solid business. There have been several times Marvel and DC have been on the verge of bankruptcy. In fact, Marvel did declare bankruptcy, if I recall. But they were too big they found investors or found a way out of it. So it's even a company like Marvel is not immune to the, vagaries of the business environment. As a singular creator, you need to understand that if you want to make this a hobby, that's fine. Knock yourself out. Put out an occasional book when you feel like it, and just be happy with that. But if you want to make a living of it or a business of it, you need to seriously sit down and find somebody to manage your business or learn how to do it yourself. Know about taxes, know about deductions, know about business expenses, know about, how the printing costs, all the costs that are associated with doing a comic book. It's not easy, I'll grant you that. Nowadays people are saying, oh yeah, well, everyone's going online to read their comics. Yes, there's a lot of people reading it, but the problem is you're not. It's very rare. It's a very rare instance. You can translate that into monetary wealth to the point where you can either run a company, live off the proceeds of that. Now, I'm not saying it isn't possible, but so far, I have yet to meet anybody who's made a living just doing comics online. No, I'm pretty sure there are exceptions. So, I'm just saying that as far as I know, there hasn't been that many. But and you can say, well, Ben, you can do crowdfunding and stuff like that. Yes, that is true. That's an option open to you. The thing is that you know, can you maintain it? And also, uh, your the crowdfunding is like the Wild West. Basically, it's a perfect example of a free market. People support your thing, your creation, based on whether they believe in it or trust you. Also, you have the thing of Kickstarter and Indiegogo gatekeeping projects. You're just not allowed to put anything on there and just run wild. No, they have to approve your project. And the thing is that what happens when they say no? No, we're not really going to approve your project. So that's why you have to find as many monetary avenues that you can find. Don't be limited that, oh, this is old fashioned, this won't work. Every option is open, and that's the key to success, in my opinion. A&R Press is a small company. I'll grant you that. We're not one of the big dogs, okay, but we're still here. We are still here. I can go back 40 years, and list countless comic book publishers with way more money, way more influence, way more support from the business and the industry than Anarch Press has. We've never been treated seriously by both the comic community or the retailers. We're just a small independent comic book company, that produces book comics on a regular basis. Comics we like, comics we enjoy. We're by creators that we feel like they need to have a chance to get out in the marketplace. That's our mission statement. To produce comics we like and to help creators break into the business. That is our main goal and main purpose. And we're not, fabulously wealthy. Don't get me wrong. But we know how to manage our money, especially in times when things are rough. We find ways to find every single penny that we can to maintain our system is afloat. And we know that the constant flow of product is the key in order to maintain sustainability, especially in this market. And that's why I believe, unless, and I'm not saying that, comic case should change. If they want to go down their trajectory, that's fine. I don't care. That's their business. But if they want to remain relevant over a long period of time, they're going to have to treat it seriously as a business. My advice would be, have a election and have somebody who runs the Comicsgate who knows how to run it. Knows how to get things out, knows how to produce things, knows what is good, for the brand. But as it stands, it's just all it is a label. That's all it is. It's just a label. A label that has diminishing returns as time goes on. Sooner or later, I predict, that all the creators that were in Comicsgate are just going to do their own thing. They're going to distance themselves from Comicsgate, pretend it never even happened. They used it as a jumping off point, but once they're through with it, they're done. It's just like a one-use, condom. Once you've shot your load, you're on to the next thing. And loyalty, in a movement that has diminishing returns, eventually it's going to collapse in of itself. Eventually, it may not take a year, it may not take 5 years, but eventually it's going to happen. This is I've seen it before. You think Comics Gate is the only movement that's come before? It's not. There's been other movements. There was the movement. Neil Adams tried to create a union with comic book people, and that flopped spectacularly. Comic book creators is like trying to unionize comic creators is like trying to herd cats. You can't be done. Artists are too fickle. Their vision, is too centric. How do you justify paying one artist one rate and another artist another? You can't. It's based on skill. It's based on talent. It's based on professionalism. Those are all key factors in determining what a artist is worth, on the open market. That's why I always, encourage, if you're a artist who've made it, to do your own thing, create your own product, create your own creations. That's the key to success. No one ever gets rich working for somebody else. You have to determine your own future. And by doing so, you determine the fate, of what you can and can't do. I am part of Antarctic Press, and I do get a salary, but Antarctic Press allows me to create my own things, and benefit from that. So I have the best of both worlds. I have, steady income from a publisher, and that allows me to create new things and benefit from that. And that's the one big advantage I have. Someday I'd like to have that 6-figure project. Hasn't happened yet, but someday I'd like to see that done. But in order for me to someday hopefully achieve that, I have to keep creating. I've got to create something of such, resonance that people will say, yeah, that's something I would really like to support. But anyway, that's my little advice, especially if you're just starting off. If you're just a first-time creator, think carefully about what you want to do. Plan carefully. See what you want to do. Is your idea something that will last 1 year, 2 years, 10 years down the line? How many stories do you think you can actually come up with? It could be one of those things that's one and done, sure. But then it has to be something that is so, profoundly epic in scope that you can continue to reap benefits from it years or decades down the line. Or just examples of it. Watchmen is a good one. Mouse is a good example. Another. There's countless comic books creations that have stood the test of time and continue to sell even to this day. And that's what you want to achieve. But until that happens, you still got to produce something that will keep you afloat. Do you think Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, is that the only thing they've ever created? No. They did countless other works before that. They built an audience for their material over the years, over the decades. So when they did do that magnum opus project that it hit out of the park, then they can continue to reap the benefits. And that's really what that's your end goal. You want to be able to create something so profound, so epic that people start to take notice and they'll want to keep reading it no matter how many years or decades have passed. So anyway, I think I've blabbered on long enough. Until next time, this has been Dunn signing off.